Welcome back, everyone. We'll get underway. Our guest today is a world-leading expert in leadership and creating high-performing teams. He's here to tell us about the dimensions that make a team high-performing and how NASA have gone about building high performance over his time with them. Charlie is the author of How NASA Builds Teams. He's also the former director of the NASA Astrophysics division. He launched and repaired the Hubble telescope. And as you know, that would have opened up a view of the universe that before that moment was just not possible. So it's really changed how we think about who we are in space. Charlie was one of very few to receive the very unusual distinction of an Outstanding Leadership Medal twice. Because that's only awarded when the contribution is so extraordinary that nothing else would suffice. He's also received presidential rank awards from Ronald Regan and Bill Clinton for sustained superior accomplishment. Please join me in welcoming the person that has changed the course of NASA's culture more than any other, Charlie Pellerin. Welcome, Charlie. Charlie, James Webb is very topical at the moment. We are seeing these amazing images coming back to us almost on a daily basis. But Hubble was really the start of this. This was the precursor that made us think that this would be valuable and possible. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, wasn't it? There were some really serious issues with the Hubble telescope initially. Just tell us a little bit about why the mission initially failed and then what you did to rescue it.
Well, it's kind of a complicated story. I think in a very simple way, Hubble was a very difficult, project managerially, politically, technically. For example, one of the more daunting requirements is that you want the telescope to operate at its maximum potential, what we call the diffraction limit. And for that, the telescope had to be pointed with a stability of 0.007 of an arc second for 24 hours at a time. Now, most of you don't think in milliarc seconds. This is the angle, for example, a pearl would make the distance from Washington, D.C. to New York City. So problems like that and the fine guidance sensors were really the focus of all of our attention. And something really banal, namely manufacturing the mirror, never got on anybody's radar screen as a potential problem. And basically, here's what happened. Eastman Kodak built two mirror blanks of the 96-inch mirrors that would have been adequate to fly. But PerkinElmer had a technique involving computer-controlled polishing that would take the mirror to this absolute limit, the diffraction limit. So we let them do that. One of the rather simple tasks in there was to respace a measuring device. And the methodology would normally use a micrometer, an optical grade micrometer. Instead, we used a metering bar, an INVAR metering bar from Bureau standards, and a little temperature controlled box. Had to have a cap put on the end. The guy was under a lot of schedule pressure, not being monitored. He's trying to respace this and get the program back on schedule. And the instructions said to spray the little cap that you put on top of the rod with non-reflective paint. Well, he couldn't find the paint. So he put some non-reflective tape and took his little X-Acto knife and cut a little hole in the end of the cap. What he didn't realize was that he made a little burr on the side that happened to be the place the laser hit. And the instructions were to move the thing in 4 directions and watch the intensity go down. So he put on a little burr, went onto the tape, onto the tape, onto the tape, and into the hole. So we misspaced the measuring device by 1.3 millimeters, and that was enough to wreck the mirror. Why didn't we find it? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. One is the error in the final mirror was actually very small, and a typical human thing you may be familiar with, confirmation bias. There were many hints of the error, and PerkinElmer engineers looked at it, and they couldn't comprehend that the mirror was malformed. This would be an amateur mistake. So what they did is they did what technical people often do. They did a calculation, assuming the mirror was like a liquid, very difficult thing to do. Assumed it calculated with sag and one gravity by this amount and forgot about it. So our first sight of this was when we were on orbit and looking at our first star and believing that we had everything locked in. All the hard parts worked, the fine guidance sensors worked, this big stabilization system worked. So to say it was a shock would be an understatement, but that's basically what happened.
Charlie, when you send a telescope to space and it costs $1.5 billion and it doesn't work, I'm thinking there's normally a Senate inquiry that follows on the back of this. And I guess what was interesting about your journey is that at some point you concluded that it was actually less about a technical error and more about the social context that existed at that time within your team and within NASA. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? You know, how did that realization come, and what led you to that conclusion?
Well, I was a member of the Failure Review Board as kind of a liaison to NASA, and it was chaired by a person I had great respect for, a guy named Luke Allen, who at that time was director of Jet Propulsion Lab. And we met up in Connecticut a few times, and nobody could figure out what happened. And he finally did. And when he went to the Congress to explain how we spent actually $5 billion, if you put it in today's dollars, in 15 years and built a useless telescope, he said the root cause was a leadership failure. And I was leader of the team, but no one in the technical community blamed me because nobody understood what I could have done wrong. But I got interested in this, and also we built my division built a very interesting cryogenic telescope. Cryogenic means cold, a telescope operating at with superfluid helium, a couple of tenths of degree above absolute zero, for a scientist named John Mather. It was a very difficult project that measured the background radiation of the Big Bang very accurately. It got John a Nobel Prize. But in the mid 80s, John came into my office, and I had so much respect for him, a brilliant physicist. And he sat there and said, "Charlie, I'm convinced that half the cost of a project is socially determined." Now, I didn't know what that meant, and I would have ignored it from anybody other than John. But it was kind of in my head, and then this thing comes along, leadership failure. So I secretly did something I probably could have been fired for, moved money into a secret account and began the servicing mission on my own when there was no technical solution. When we had a technical solution, I went public with the fact that I had misappropriated $60 million and nobody seemed to care. I worked for a lawyer once who told me, "You can do illegal things all you want if nobody cares." So anyway, this got me promoted up to the top of NASA, and I pretty much hated it. I like to work with scientists and engineers to build things. These federal agencies at the top are all politics. I don't do politics well, don't like politics well. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life, and I got the idea to go to a university and study the connection between social failures and technical failures. And that's the work I've been doing the last 25 years. People ask me about the transition. It's really not very different from research in physics. We're just working with different components. You derive the equations, you do experiments. It's the same process. So that's how that all happened. My path has certainly been, I don't know, extraordinarily fortunate and unforeseen.
So Charlie, just tell us a bit about those, what you concluded in, through that study and research in your time at Columbia University. What was the root cause of this and other mission failures? I'm thinking some of the Mars missions and obviously the very public Columbia and Challenger.
Well, so I was working now in the field of social science that physicist Richard Feynman would say, social science lacks science, and it's mostly true. And I came across a book called The Challenger Launch Decision. I was very involved with Challenger. I had a payload in the cargo bay, and I'd assumed it was a technical failure, but Diane Vaughan's book said social context was the failure. And she said, "It is unfortunate that the sociological cause is the real one, because these forces are elusive and unacknowledged." So I got to thinking about this, and I began to look at failures of all sorts and found they all had this common root, a social context or human failure. So that might not surprise you, but it surprised me. And the idea, so what I began looking at is books about this kind of thing, and none of them appeal to me because they're all the same. They're lists, and physicists don't like just lists. We like principles, equations, coordinate systems. So I began to explore this and wondered, is there a coordinate system that could unlock social phenomena the same way, so for example, XY coordinates or cylindrical coordinates or even relativistic coordinates can unlock the secrets of nature. So I took all the popular business books, and I had some resolve because I'm just teaching, and I looked in there. They all had the same thing. They all had stories about somebody, Bill Gates or Andy Grove or someone like that. They all had someplace in there, the 4, 5, or 6 or 7 things you're supposed to do. So I put these on the wall of my office and began applying coordinate systems from physics, and there's lots of them, trying to find an integrating thread between these various recommendations. I tried for 2 months and I failed completely. It didn't work. The day that I gave up, I picked up the newspaper and there was a Dilbert cartoon. And it said, every consultant makes his living with a 2x2 matrix. And I kind of laughed at it and said, I've been made this too hard. It's an XY system, but which one? At the same time, I was reading work about Jung's theory of personality development, translated from German. And he said something really important. He said, we build our personalities on innate processes that come from our choices in how information we choose to use and how we make decisions. Aha, a coordinate system that fits a social idea. So I knew how we made decisions, either with logic or emotion, and both are valid in certain contexts. And I knew the information was only 2 types: intuition, which is kind of an unconscious integration of past experiences, and data, what you might call just what you observe. So I took this thing and it divided social contexts, which had been mysterious, into 4 elements that you could play with. So in my first work, I looked at projects. I'd probably been involved with 15 or 20 over my career. I looked at projects that had failed and mapped them in this system, and projects that had succeeded. And a pattern emerged where projects that succeeded had all 4 dimensions filled, and projects that failed had usually 2 missing, often on the emotional side. So next thing happened was I got contacted by an aerospace company and wanted me to help them win proposals. And I showed them that I could characterize their proposal team with this system as to where it fell. I could characterize where the customer was, and if they were mismatched, they would lose. And this got one company like $20 billion worth of business. My biggest mistake was, instead of working by the hour, I should have worked for 1% of what I gained for them. That led to the whole evolution of this little tiny coordinate system over the years, applying it to all parts of team building. Team building became my sort of passion. Really, I started out with leadership because of the Lou Allen remark. And I talked to some of my colleagues about what they cared about. I'm a project manager, basically. And they said, we don't care about leadership, we care about team performance. So I developed a suite of tools over the years to measure and manage team performance using this coordinate system. That's it in a nutshell. And it works. And I've got data. 1,500 NASA teams voluntarily use this thing. There's never been anything like this in NASA, and I'm a physicist. I'm not an HR person. So that's how it happened.
Charlie, tell us a little bit about the system and what does it address that wasn't previously addressed within NASA?
I think that there's one very simple thing. It works. So we take data. So at first I had the coordinate system. And then I was using it to teach classes, workshops, 3-day workshops, kind of like the thing I'd been done back at the university. And I had some repeat students, and I was astounded that people who had taken the thing 6 months ago couldn't remember the material. This was a shock to me. Then I discovered that people don't remember anything that doesn't have repetition. We just don't. So if you take my PhD in physics, had esoteric courses that I have completely forgotten because there's been absolutely zero use for them in anything ever after. It's more like a fraternity initiation to get a PhD than anything else. So anyway, I then added a coaching element to it. Then I wanted to understand whether the coaching and the workshop was being effective in behavioral change. I'm a behaviorist, and behavior, if you don't change behavior, you haven't done anything. And if you don't measure it, you don't know if you changed it. So I built some online tools to measure 8 critical behaviors, and 2 in each of those dimensions, and therefore infer the social context. And I like to use scientific metaphors. And so social context fields, which are created by our behaviors, affect other people's behaviors the same way that matter attracts itself gravitationally and affects other matter. Same thing with electromagnetism. So this is a social field that works just like the physical fields, except this works with people's behaviors and the others work with ferromagnetic materials or matter. So I developed this set of tools and began working with flight projects. That's my background. And pretty soon people told their friends, this actually works. And so we're seeing the data, we're seeing the projects improve their performance, and they're telling their friends. And so this blossomed into one of the biggest contracts NASA's ever had, other than with Lockheed Martin and people like that, as this work grew and grew. So then the book, and then it's more international. So that's how it works. I think the difference between everything else is that you can see, just like physics, you know, there are lots of people that wrote papers about how things move through space. But until Newton wrote a paper that said, here's a formula, F equals ma, that someone could use to do something, it wasn't important. The same way, all these other books, and I hate to denigrate them, but this is the truth, and other methodologies are collections of stuff that nobody finds an easy way to apply, and nobody measures whether it actually works. Newton's laws wouldn't be famous except they work. You can land a person on the moon with Newton's laws. That's all you need for the mathematics. So this system does the same thing with social context. And as I got into this, I was astounded that everything from Korean Airlines crashing to the 737 MAX, every one of these, Challenger, could have been prevented using these tools. If you simply measured the context, saw that it wasn't functioning for people, it wasn't creating a high behavior environment, and use these simple tools, and I give them away. They're so important that they're free to everybody, that you could do all this. But people are, I don't know, too lazy to tell me. I don't know. So that's the deal.
Charlie, I've read your book, How NASA Builds Teams, and in there you observed that I think you yourself were, because you've color coded the system, and you observed that you were a blue leader in your early days, and also as part of that, you make the observation that NASA teams, as technical teams, were actually pretty good at developing a vision for a team, setting a mission, directing activities to achieve that. But I think there were 2 other dimensions that they were much weaker at. Could you elaborate on that a little?
So the little tool, when you put it on anything social, you can also put it on people's innate personalities. And that goes back to the original Jungian work. And you can learn that people function most easily in one of 4 of those, I call them dimensions because quadrants is kind of stale. And so, for example, the one on the upper left is about caring about other people. That's your deal. So people in occupations of training, nursing, medical, they're naturally working there. And I tried for years to get people to name them, and they wouldn't. They could go back to upper left quadrant or lower right quadrant. So one day I decided to give them colors. So I gave the green, that one, I called it cultivating, and called it green because it grows people. And the one below that is about human relationships. And there are people like salespeople, or particularly, or anyone who's in a relational business. That's what they love to do. That's what they're fit. So I named that including, because I knew that's our most important human need. Then I colored that yellow because I used the other colors. People who live in this place of the future, which is where I and Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, all of us live in that space. They're richer than me because that was never an objective of mine. But so we're blue for blue sky thinking. And then the bottom one is about discipline, organization, process, CEOs of most American companies sit there. I called it orange, and the way to remember it is our orange sun organizes the universe. So people can actually, during my workshops, you can watch 2 or 3 minute movie clips and you can characterize people's innate color. So one of the things that's fun to do is the stuff, you can give them these things. You've got these, Paul, you can give these tools. You can characterize your mate, look at how your marriage works. You can characterize your friends. I find everyday use with people who know this, and to learn this takes an hour or something like that. This doesn't, a PhD in physics takes 7 years. This takes an hour, maybe 2. So, and so it's handy that way. So that's an early use of it. But with respect to team performance, they need to have all 4. And if you just think about it a minute, don't people need to feel appreciated? If you're not sure about this, think of a place you didn't feel appreciated. You likely left physically and or emotionally. Included. That's why our politics is so screwed up. Everybody wants to be included in these groups, so they buy into whatever the group's thinking. And that's kind of what happened with Challenger. So we all need to feel included. Vision is about a realistic hope. We all need some hope for a better future to get out of bed in the morning. And finally, the orange is about discipline. And so you can't really do anything in the world without, it starts with, clean up your room, pick up your socks or whatever. So all 4 elements matter, and they even matter different times of the day. So if anyone is completely absent, you're going to have a difficult time performing. If you can't ever envision a better future, or you can't ever discipline yourself to do what's right, or you can't show people you care for them or make people feel like they belong. So these are, I'm always interested as a physicist getting down to what's under the surface. This is the bottom level, these needs around these 4 places. And it flows naturally from the organic nature of Jung's work that I just put in the system and played with.
I found it really interesting, Charlie, reading how you use the system to unpack some of the greatest political speeches of our time, and looking at how those leaders do all 4 of those dimensions in dealing with the public. But the one story that really stuck with me, Charlie, is the story you tell about the 9/11 responder. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Oh, yeah, you're talking about, let's see, how does it go? Yeah, it's people, he saw people whispering into the ears of the dead words that they yearned to have heard while they were alive. So go appreciate people in your life today.
Thank you, Charlie.
That came from a friend of mine, an FBI agent who went up to the World Trade Center and got back. I said, "What'd you learn?" That's what he told me. So appreciation is food for the soul. We don't do enough of it. We don't have it as a habit. In fact, there's 8 key behaviors, but if anyone asks me, tell me the one that's most important, I'd say make a habit of authentic appreciation. So I'm rebuilding a house after a wildfire. And the first thing I did was we got lots and lots of subcontractors working in there. And early on, I saw them sitting on concrete eating lunch. So I bought them some chairs and a table to eat lunch. Then I brought in a little refrigerator and stock it with food and beer. So I tell them, if you put the paint on wrong, you better not be drinking my beer to do it. But at the end of the day, especially the guys that work hard, they want to sit down, have a beer before they go home. And I understand that. And I put chips and food, and I look at their work and I appreciate them for doing it. Most of them work hard as hell. They don't make a lot of money. And so this is a habit. So try this with your spouse, with your children. I think children get something like 8 negative strokes for every positive one. And if you spend as much time in universities as I have, you get a PhD in criticism. I'm trying to think back to my 7 years in graduate school. Anybody ever say, "Boy, you're going to be great at something"? No, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. So make appreciation part of your life. And I make this an overnight assignment in workshops and get reports in the morning. And these are transformative things, even write a letter. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the people in NASA that I appreciate it. I don't see them anymore. I haven't been with NASA for a long time. I sat down one afternoon and I sent emails to them, and I just thanked them for the gifts they'd given me, to my own children. My son emailed me back and said, "I've never told you how much I appreciated. You've been a model of character in my life." And people fall down in tears because someone actually cares about them. So make appreciation a habit, and you can do it with verbal, which is most common, or a gesture, me putting the food out for them, or the refrigerator and the microwave. Those are gestures. Those are even more powerful. So, I'm always looking at what are the, just like physics goes down to the elementary particles, what are the elementary particles of the human condition? This needs around appreciation and inclusion. That's it. That's all you need to know. Do that and life will be good.
Thank you, Charlie. We actually had a panel to start our day, and on that panel we had the first Australian with disability to be going to space. So just a great example of that kind of inclusion and thinking about what that means in a NASA style context. But we're at time. So Charlie, I just want to say thank you so much for taking this moment to join us and for sharing some of that wisdom. I highly recommend to anyone who hasn't read How NASA Builds Teams to get the book. And once again, thanks for sharing your time and wisdom with us, Charlie.
I'll just say I'm sorry I'm not there with you. I've been to Australia half a dozen times and always enjoyed it thoroughly. You're just great, fun people.
Thanks, Charlie. I'll pass that on to the audience, but I think they already know it. Thanks so much, Charlie. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.